Thank you for that catch.
Technical difficulties.
You see,
Oh!
it's not a stream. So let's rewind that past 2 minutes and try
Sure.
that again. Hi there.
Yep.
Welcome to today's
Yep.
episode of the Grim Litany of Librarians. Joining me today is Roland from the Discord. Roland, please tell us about yourself.
I'm some random schmuck on the internet with a very short attention span and renewable memory, apparently. I occasionally vomit random words onto a page, and occasionally people like to play RPGs centered around those words randomly vomited onto a page. So, there we go.
And you're also in Lowborn number 4.
Yep.
Which is coming
Yep.
out. Which is coming out tomorrow. Yeah.
And deja vu. Yes, no, that's very exciting. After a long wait, the much awaited Lowborn 4 will be released onto the library. So that's cool. Yeah, no, found out there was a periodical that you guys did. I had some ideas that I thought would be nifty to include into the game. And since I'm basically piggybacking off of a bunch of other people's considerably harder work, I decided, yeah, I could throw words in other people's general direction. And it seemed to have taken. And you fools said you want to pay me for it. So, like,
Yeah. And you're also a guest on today's show.
Indeed. Again, I just randomly show up places sometimes and it works.
Yeah. So today's show, we're gonna be talking about combat today. Which, like, specifically, this is like gonna be combat for Zweihander. Because the Zweihander's mechanics are slightly different, but it's applicable to any tabletop. Like, the design philosophies you can transfer over. I know you said you haven't really had a chance to run Zweihander, but you had a chance to read through how to run combat, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm actually very familiar with the Fantasy Flight 40K RPGs, which are very, very, very similar in terms of just pure mechanics. Some of the details alter here and there, but for the most part, they are fundamentally the same system. Yeah. Also, as you said, combat philosophy can be just kind of applied wholesale to. Specifically, what I'm going to talk about can be just applied wholesale to basically any system in which combat is a means of problem solving, which, to be fair, is the vast majority of them.
Right. So, when it comes to combat design, there is several key elements, right? We've got the players themselves,
mm-hmm.
and then we've got the NPCs, who may or may not be mm-hmm. allies or foes, and then we've got the environment.
Yep.
So, what are some tips you have for writing combat?
So, I have 3 things that I personally think are essential for interesting combat. The first is a viable threat. It's not really an interesting combat unless there is something present that poses a legitimate form of threat to the players. Because this is a player-focused situation, they're really the only people to whom that threat matters. That threat doesn't necessarily have to be the antagonists. It doesn't have to be the other combatants. It can be something like an environmental factor. Something I would consider to be a threat besides the antagonists is, for example, an escape scene, which combat is occurring. There's a lava flow from one end of a chamber, and the party has to get out of the way. The enemies that get in their way aren't necessarily the threat there. It's the instant death wall that's coming up behind them would be a reasonable example for that. The second thing I would consider absolutely essential for combat is a dynamic environment.
Mm-hmm.
An environment that specifically you can interact with. Doesn't necessarily have to be anything spectacular. For example, the average living room is actually a fantastic spot for combat design, I personally find, because there's just so many things in there that can have a direct effect on the combat itself. Cover, which we're probably going to be talking a lot about.
Oh yeah.
Things that impede movement, improvised, like potential improvised weapons, environmental threats, all that kind of good stuff. And the third thing that I find key for any good combat is an objective.
Mm-hmm.
The party or the enemy has to want something out of the combat, or else why would they be willing to put their lives and physical safety on the line in order to duke it out?
Right. Which is like that's a great point. Like, going back to the thing you said about like the living room itself can be an environment. Like you've got the cover, and you've got improvised weapons, and you've also got like you also have to consider the layout of the room. Because like I mean you can move a table really easily in combat because it's light, but you can't necessarily move like a couch. So
depending on the character, yep, absolutely true.
Right. And so like those affect how players move through the space, which I find is also just as important. Like I find that has really an important part of combat is thinking about how the players will move through the space.
Positioning is probably the single most important aspect to combat from the player's perspective. Mm-hmm. Like from the micro perspective as opposed to the macro.
Right. Like it's important in, for example, in Zweihander a little bit, but like it's way more important in other systems that have like flanking rules.
Flanking rules. Anytime ranged combat is involved, how movement plays into the combat is huge. Mm-hmm. Well, again, how that's the single most basic way the players can interact with the environment proper.
Yeah, exactly.
Is through movement.
So, do you like you've played a lot of tabletop games? Like, do you have any examples of encounters you designed with these philosophies in mind?
See, unfortunately, I have a really hard time with a couple of them. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, it's really hard for me to intentionally build combat encounters with this particular line of thinking built into them. They tend to just happen as opposed to be something I deliberately sit down and think about.
Right.
But one of the biggest combats I've ever run was in D&D. Of course it was. 5th edition. Mm-hmm. The threat was a large number of enemies that were all converging on a single location. The environment was a ruined temple that had been overtaken by a desert that held a well that was super sacred to a religion and was a font of like powerful magical energy that the bad guys were coming to corrupt and despoil.
Of course.
And there were built-in defenses that the temple guardians had constructed in order to turn the environment against those who would try to desecrate their shrine. And the objective was defend the shrine.
Right.
Now, pro tip for those of you who have not tried it, wave defense missions in tabletop role-playing games, not worth the bother. Don't do it. It's really hard to do properly.
Now, do you find it hard to do because, like, it's a lot of enemies to keep track of, or what? What makes it specifically hard?
So first off, if you're building a wave design thing, you're probably being influenced by a video game. Mm-hmm. Because that's a pretty common video game objective,
right?
To a lot of missions. So odds are pretty good you're going to be trying to adapt a game with a core mechanic that will not match to the tabletop role-playing game that you're playing because the translation is kind of tough. Mm-hmm. Going back to D&D, unless you're using minion rules from 4th edition, most enemies worth your party's time gonna have too many hit points to make it fun.
Yeah.
Like that's the core thing, is that it's really, really quickly going to turn into a grind. The fact that it's also a static location makes it kind of difficult too. So unless you pack a lot of good stuff in there to keep people's attention, people are going to get bored and immediately revert back to what I refer to as the player default state, which is the most optimal method possible.
Mm-hmm.
I tend to find a lot of my personal combat design is trying to find ways to encourage the players to avoid that particular state of mind, to value creativity and dynamicism, if that's even a word I don't even know anymore, as opposed to just rote efficiency, like just pure efficiency. And some tabletop RPG systems do that way better than others.
Right.
D&D 5e, not very good at it.
So you mentioned the player default. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You mentioned the player default state, and you said it was the optimized.
The most efficient possible, which is usually involving optimization.
Right.
But nine times out of 10, in my experience, I understand this is super subjective, and some people are far luckier than I am. A lot of times I will find that given the option between, let's say, pushing an enemy over a ledge into a pit or just stabbing them, the player will often just stab them. Right. Because that's just the most efficient way.
Yeah, because...
The most efficient and reliable option.
Yeah, because, like, when you're doing it, it's an opposed check, usually, to resist. Like, yeah. I know in Zweihander, I've built a character, June, who is a blitzballer, which is basically just murder football.
Yes, I've heard stories of this character.
And her whole thing is built around charging and tackling before she goes to make her attack. And unfortunately, because of the way tackling works in Zweihander, it's really difficult to actually land that tackle. It wouldn't be as efficient to do if I wasn't getting that tackle for free. Like, because I'm getting that tackle for free as part of my talent. I think it's because I'm a blitzballer linebacker or something like that. I don't remember exactly which one she is, but she's the one who tackles. That's her position. If it wasn't for
she's a big lady.
Yeah, she's a very big lady.
She's a big lady.
If it wasn't for the fact that I could do that tackle for free, I probably wouldn't be doing it nearly as often.
What is it? Takedown is an action point. Charging is 2 action points. So especially if you wanted to follow up with an attack, like that's just not doable unless you want to burn a fortune point. And burning a fortune point comes with risks.
Yeah, exactly. So like, because she gets the takedown for 0 AP at the end of a charge.
Yeah.
That's why that's why it works the way it works. And like, I think I've only taken down one person, but then I didn't hit them. I missed my attack.
Oh. That's rough.
Yeah, it was like super disappointing. Like, yeah, I finally did it. I finally tackled somebody, and then I went to go punch them, and my punch just went wide.
That's 3d6 down the drain.
Exactly. That's the whole reason why I do it is charge 1d6, tackle 1d6 when they're knocked prone, and then the punch for the third d6.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But yeah, so to tie that back, like it is often technically more efficient. Like players will go for the more efficient. I'm gonna stab this thing because it's a static number that I have to beat. If I remember correctly, when I was really heavily playing Pathfinder a couple years ago.
My condolences.
No, see, I love Pathfinder. Don't get me wrong, I love Pathfinder.
I'm glad. I cut my teeth GMing on Pathfinder, so I've got some bias against that system.
Right.
I also got tired of hearing the sentence, does an 87 hit?
Does an 87 hit? Yeah, oh my god.
And then me answering, no. I got tired of that. My campaigns tend to run pretty long, so as a direct result, and I like seeing the progression of players from 1 to 20 to like use the D&D terminology for it.
Right.
I genuinely enjoy that. The problem is that some games get like there just comes a point where it becomes not fun to run.
Right.
Combat specifically. And that's around level 7 in 5th edition and level 5 in Pathfinder.
Yeah. So
that particular facial expression looks really good with my mustache. Just sorry, random side note. I don't get to see my face too often, so that particular disappointment looks considerably better. All right, continue.
As I was saying with Pathfinder, my my wizard players, they would tend to pick save or suck spells over spells where you had to make a spell attack because those were more efficient. Like you forced the monster to roll rather than your roll.
Correct.
And if the monster doesn't have necessarily great saves, then they're taking that damage. So for them, it was the most efficient way of dealing with their problems in combat.
Which is super fluffy for wizards. Like that's fantastic for wizards, and I agree. I think that's both fluffy and the proper. Well, proper is the wrong word, but like the way to play them that makes sense. You're this hyper intelligent magic user, right?
Right.
Gunning for the enemy's weaknesses or creating advantageous situations would be your main job under those particular circumstances.
Exactly.
So that works. It's just always a tragedy when the raging barbarian decides, you know what, I'm going to use my axe instead of punting this guy down a pit.
Yeah, like
because everyone wants to be Leonidas.
Yeah, you want them. Like, okay, so that one of the things that I appreciate about Zweihander is that it does actually encourage you to not necessarily just stab your enemies.
From my reading specifically, and this is one thing I do very much appreciate about Zweihander so far, is that because you can only make one attack a round and you can make one perilous stunt a round, the setup is just as important as the actual attack itself.
Yeah, very much so.
And also from what I've seen, certain perilous stunts are actually basically required to deal with certain kinds of enemies.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with a heavily armored knight and you're a bunch of peasants, you're just going to try and strangle them, for example.
Yeah.
Which would be way easier to deal with than, stabbing someone in plate mail.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a good idea.
Because that's like with Zweihander specifically, there's the way for those of you who are not familiar with Zweihander, that you don't have armor class, you have a damage threshold that you have to roll over. You have to roll the damage over. So if their damage threshold for like that knight, for example, I think like plate mail gives you a +6.
You're looking +7.
+7, yeah. So it's a +7, and they have.
You're looking at around 10. You have to deal 11 damage in order to do any damage, I believe.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, you have to roll over 11.
On a D6, ain't easy.
Yeah, like you can explode your dice, sure. Like fortune points.
That's a 15% chance, give or take.
Yeah.
Not great.
It's not great at all. Great. So you have to set up ways to either get more fury
dice,
or set up ways or do the chokehold, for example. Because like you can choke them out, and it knocks them if you incapacitate them, it knocks them out completely. At which point they are at your mercy to be instantly slain.
I like that a lot.
Helpless.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, that's something that I appreciate about the system. Like, and then there are even monsters who are completely immune to those kinds of things, like the Bog Behemoth. It has the Chthonian Dweller trait. I think I pronounced that right.
Chthonian.
What was that?
Chthonian.
Yeah, so it has the Chthonian Dweller trait. So what that means is that it's immune completely to chokeholds because it doesn't technically breathe.
Yeah.
So
it's a dweller in the deep.
Exactly. So you can't choke that out, but it has like a 13 damage threshold. So you have to figure out other ways, so like charging or lighting it on fire. Both good ways to deal with it. But
my favorite solution to most problems.
Light it on fire.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like
we talked about my branding earlier, so like yeah, you get it.
Yeah, exactly. What are some ways then that like we can like what are some ways like outside of the system which encourages perilous stunts and things like that? What are some ways we can also help encourage players to do these things?
To be creative as opposed to just going with the tried and true methods. So the dynamic environment is key, I feel. If there's a lava pit in the center of the room, I guarantee you a player will go, oh, I can use that, and will immediately try to use that. Or they'll spend the entire fight trying to be as far away from that as humanly possible.
Right.
If you're playing online, make sure your map is big enough for that one player who will do everything in their power to be as far away from that lava pit in the center of the arena as possible. Just be prepared.
Yeah.
Another thing is a solid variety of enemies. Because if you're running, like, let's just say a peasant mob, which is a classic, by the way, especially when players are involved, because players' natural tendency, along with efficiency, tends to be cause as much chaos and light as much shit on fire as possible. Literally, in the case of my group, sometimes.
We had a discussion about this just before the show.
Yep. If you're on the Discord, I talked about it a little bit in the off-topic section. So, like, you're running a peasant mob, let's say. Putting a peasant in the ground in any system, usually pretty easy. So as a direct result, party is just going to do whatever is fastest.
Right.
However, if you mix in that peasant mob with, let's say, the local knight, whose job it is to defend the peasants as per the actual laws of feudalism, suddenly the presence of that heavily armored figure means, okay, we might need to change up our tactics a little bit. Now, if, say, there also, I don't know, happens to be a werewolf amongst those peasants, craziness is about to ensue, and it's going to be fun for somebody.
It's going to be incredibly chaotic, just from that setup alone.
Absolutely. Also, if you pull off that setup, please let me know. I want to hear how it goes. Because, like,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going. So yeah, combat dynamic. Like, you're that's the way you could set it up. With a dynamic environment and opponents, correct?
And then the third aspect with objectives as well, depending on what the objective is that can radically change the layout of a fight.
Right.
For example, that earlier thing I talked about defend the objective, the party is probably going to cluster around the objective as much as possible, especially if, like, the enemies have to get within a certain distance of it in order to win, or whatever the framing is.
Right, the win condition.
If it's assassinate a particular target, odds are pretty good you're going to see a lot of focus fire on that particular dude, or less, whatever, that particular individual, as they just try to deal with that particular individual as quickly as possible. What's another good one? Defending an individual. Escort missions. We'll talk about escort missions as little as humanly possible, because I've yet to meet someone who likes escort missions.
They are the worst.
But, oh my god. I actually have, in the game that, in my D&D game again, I'm actually set up a boss fight with the story arc's big bad evil guy, and a important NPC mentioned that, like, okay, he's got this particular magic item that if he is physically holding, don't bother trying to kill him. Make sure he's not physically touching it, however, go ham. So the party basically says, oh, we're playing hot potato with it. And, like, I haven't seen how that's about to play out, but, like, I have the decided feeling it's going to be a lot of get close to the bad guy, take whatever the bad guy is holding, and then run away with it, or other variations of that, as opposed to, okay, we're just going to open fire on villain du jour,
right,
and see how that goes.
Yeah, like this reminds me. I think it was I think I read a story. I think it was for Curse of Strahd.
Oh, such a good module.
Strahd somehow has, I think, the holy symbol of Ravenkind. Or no, I think he uses a spell to rip the holy symbol of Ravenkind out of the player's hands and throws it out the window. So it's no longer an issue for him. So that sort of reminds me of what you were saying, where, but it's the opposite situation. So if your players, what I'm getting at here is if your players have something like that can help turn the tide, and the enemy knows this and they're smart enough, have them try and negate that, right?
Also, another key thing from a DM perspective, which is mostly where I talk from, because DM and design overlap each other almost 100%. There's an almost 100% overlap. The enemy's objectives and the player's objectives don't always have to match.
Right.
For example, in a straight-up brawl, the enemy's and the player's objectives are going to have the same thing, which is probably like either end the threat or just survive, depending on what the context is, right?
Right.
But if it's like, say, an assassination sort of objective, like deal with the boss's objective could be, okay, survive, straightforward, simple. I think that's the unspoken objective to literally every combat. Survive, and, like, for example, finish a magic ritual that they're in the middle of doing. They're a bad guy. They've got magic rituals going on. I don't care what the setting is. They've got magic rituals going on. Cyberpunk Red, fuck, it's magic. It's witchcraft. It's all just technology. I don't understand that stuff. I sacrificed a toaster to turn on this laptop, though granted, I think I needed a better toaster. Or like the bad guy wants to capture a specific player.
Right.
That's one of my personal favorites, and I have to use it sparingly because shortly after it becomes really obvious really fast. But like, if you have a bad guy that's like, okay, I need that player for whatever reason, that completely changes the dynamic of the fight the second the players realize what's going on there, because then it shifts from, okay, we're trying to kill everything in the room, to, okay, we're trying to keep whatever that is away from them. We're trying to keep them safe.
Yeah.
Which is almost like an escort mission, except the escort is one of the players, which makes it 1,000 times more tolerable.
Yeah.
Because they're not useless typically.
Exactly.
Pro tip, if you are running escort missions, never make the escort useless. Just don't do it.
Yeah, like that's
it's not fun.
That's one of the biggest problems I have personally with escort missions and like video games, because this is usually where you see these kinds of things. The NPC you're escorting is useless in combat. It just sort of stands there, and yeah.
Final Fantasy X, best escort mission in existence.
See, I haven't played Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, all you really need to do is, I haven't either. All you have to do is know the storyline. The whole game, the whole setup is literally one giant escort mission.
I see.
Except you're escorting your white mage.
Okay.
And summoner. Yeah, it's well done.
Yeah, and so that means they're like, so that's like you said, they're part of the party, it sounds like.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So that makes it more interesting. So we know that the villains, so we know that, like, for example, finishing the ritual or capturing a player does also change the objectives of the, like, how the villain's going to respond to trying to capture this player, because I need to stop holding my microphone. Because when you are trying to capture somebody, typically you're trying to capture them alive and not dead.
Details. Details.
So you'll have to change. So the villain will have to change their strategy.
Yep. Non-lethal methods. This also applies for the players as well when if they have to capture a VIP for whatever reason. Depending on the system, non-lethal methods can radically change up how you do things as opposed to the lethal ones. Zweihander, your weapon selection pretty much determines whether you take someone alive or not. Because I believe there are some, like, whips which can do a chokehold.
Yeah, whips can do a chokehold. Bolas can do a chokehold.
And can't actually do damage, which is key. because unlike in 5e, you kill someone in Zweihander, there's no option to not kill them.
Right.
It's not 0 hit points in 5e where it's like, I'll keep them alive after I smack them with my axe. No, they're now dead or probably bleeding to death, one of the two.
Yeah, exactly. With Zweihander, that's where peril comes into play. You want to imperil your opponents, right? If you want to catch them alive, rather than killing them, or rather than attacking
reducing them to 0 probably won't do too much.
Right, and
again, the application of magic changes all of this because that's just what magic does.
Yeah,
sorry.
No, I was gonna say because the spell Shut Eye, instantly I think you fail to resist, you go to sleep.
I love that spell. I got a warning from a bot because apparently the word I used to describe the type of slap that a wizard would have to do in order to apply that is banned. Oopsies.
Yeah, no, I've run afoul of the bot a couple times myself.
Yeah.
Very easy to do.
I didn't know there was a list of banned words because a lot of the other words I used are apparently fine.
Anyways, though, like I said, Shut Eye puts people to sleep. I can't think of any. I think there are some spells that do peril instead of damage.
The entire Arcana of Luminescence doesn't do damage.
Right.
Which is real irritating to me, but fine, whatever. Come on, man. Space lasers don't hurt people? No. One of my... Actually, I'm writing another set of spell lists for Lowborn 5 whenever that ends up happening. And Luminescence is one of my targets on that one, and I am 100% adding goddamn laser beams because Luminescence is entirely devoid of goddamn laser beams.
Love to see it. So we mentioned damage, but we haven't when we talked about perilous stunts a little bit, but for people who are sort of new to this game and might not understand what perilous stunt is. Perilous stunts are sort of they're things you can use to modify the battlefield. You've got the chokehold, which we've talked about extensively. You've got the takedown, which you also talked about. There is inspiring words, which increases your friend's damage threshold modifiers by +1. And then you've got Litany of Hatred, which decreases your opponent's threshold modifiers by 1. This is for both damage and peril, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there's more that I'm missing.
There's a bunch more, but we'll be taking up a good 25 minutes just listing them.
Yeah.
They're combat maneuvers that kind of move beyond smacking somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
They're the sort of things you would actually see in real fights, interestingly enough. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're a dirty fighter. Mm-hmm. Which, man, I am.
Yeah.
Man! I've put a brick in a sock and taken it to someone's knee at some point because they're being a jerk. Don't ask.
So, so what you do, with these, a lot of these, a couple of these, I think blind is one of their perilous stunts. Requires you to have a handful of sand.
It is called Dirty Trick, and I love it dearly.
Yeah. So what you have to, you that's the thing you have to think about with that. You have to set up ways for your players to take advantage of some of these perilous stunts. Mm-hmm. So that could be having a sandy floor or a muddy floor, even. Just something that they can use to fling in the other person's eyes. I think specifically what it says.
Or be real generous with pocket sand.
Yeah. I know in Sean Van Damme's in the in-between, where June is, where June is a character, I should say, we went past a fireplace full of ashes, and I asked Matt, mm-hmm. Hey Matt, can I take some of these ashes and put it in my pocket? He's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. And I did that. Yeah. And so I now have pocket sand. Which will,
Everyone should have pocket sand. Just pro tip.
yep,
Even in real life, just have pocket sand. It's fine.
yeah, just Dale it out, you know.
You never know. You never know. It's like carrying an umbrella.
Yep, exactly.
Which can also be used as a bludgeoning weapon, just as a totally unrelated side note.
Right. So,
did I mention I fight dirty? I fight dirty.
You fight dirty? Yeah, you mentioned them like what 3 times now.
Yeah.
So yeah, with that in mind, like we've got to set up the environment. What are some examples like you mentioned like a wall of lava. What are some other good examples of like a dynamic environment and how that might affect combat?
So the wall of lava one is a little bit on the extreme side,
right?
Because like that, if this was a realistic setting, everyone in that room is dead already, because lava is not safe to be anywhere around. But even in game terms, like that is an immediate shorthand for environmental hazard.
Right.
Another similar one is the acid bath. The good old acid bath. Good times. Spikes on the floor too are solid ones. I personally don't really like having those around in an environment because they're a little too gamey and a little too obvious.
Right.
For example, you got a spike-filled pit or a lava pit in the middle of the room. Everyone's going to kind of reach the same conclusion about what that thing's going to do.
Yeah.
So instead, what I personally like to do is have a natural environment packed with as much stuff in there as makes sense. Let's go back to the living room idea. I've run World of Darkness, which, for those of you who don't know, is an urban fantasy set more or less in the real world, except with werewolves, vampires, mages. Oh God, mage. Changelings. Yep. Yeah. All kind of wildness. Most of those are fine except for mage. If you look, mage GMs, y'all are brave breed. I did it briefly and I still have nightmares about it.
Oh my goodness.
I don't even want to talk about the stuff I did as a player because matter magic is broken. Moving on. Turns out when you can turn a water bottle into nitroglycerin, you've got problems.
And you've got solutions to problems.
Hopefully. Nitroglycerin is notoriously unstable.
Yeah, exactly. So like as you were talking about, like, so this water bottle, like in Mage specifically, it's something you can turn into nitroglycerin and throw it at somebody.
Yep.
But even in systems where you have low magic like Zweihander, you could use that bottle of water as a distraction.
I personally would allow it as a substitute for like dirt or sand or something for dirty trick.
Yeah.
I would be okay with that. Maybe not for water, but for like wine or something, absolutely.
Right.
Even though water would I'd be okay with it being water. But especially if it's dirty, filthy, medieval water, then that's just fine. I'm okay with that. That's gonna give him pink eye too, which is just bonus.
Yeah.
But like the tavern brawl. The tavern brawl is a fantastic combat environment because there's tables, there's jugs, there's booze. Honestly, just a jug of booze on the table is like 3 things in one right there. 1, it's an improvised weapon because you smack someone with the jug of booze.
Right.
2, it's flammable. That really just needs to be the end of the thought right there. Let's be completely honest here. And 3, if it's on a table, that means the table can now be used for a variety of different things as well.
Right.
There's the bar that's much more sturdy than a table. There are other patrons probably around, which can add to the combat as well. There's light sources, because being able to see is often nice. If your GM is of the classical sort, there'll be a chandelier because there are always chandeliers. Looking at you, Acquisitions Incorporated. Yeah, like just like air quotes around the word natural. I'm not talking like nature. I'm talking about a organic things as you would find them sort of affair. There's always plenty of stuff in there to use for a creative player.
Yeah.
It also doesn't negate the player's options of using the most efficient method. They can still walk up and go stab somebody if they really want to, because taking options away from players is not good design or DMing.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if you really wish they would stop just walking up and stabbing things and use that acid bath that I put in the middle of the room exclusively for this, guys. Come on, I worked hard on this map, please. Yeah, that's not a thing I say on a semi-regular basis. Not at all. No bitterness there.
So like one thing that you could now you bring up a good point. Like you can design your combat with the player efficiency in mind, the most effective or most efficient method for solving problems in mind, quote unquote. But like
yeah,
like not there are like what are some ways do you think that you could do to encourage that encourage not using that?
Depends on the system.
Right.
At the end of the day, it really depends on the system. So, for example, for Zweihander specifically, Zweihander very heavily favors melee combat.
Mm-hmm.
Ranged weapons are pretty short range compared to a lot of other games that I've seen. They're cumbersome. They require ammunition, and they all need to be reloaded.
Right,
which eats up on your at least 1 AP.
Yeah.
Which very seriously eats up in your action economy and efficiency. Right? So for Zweihander, probably how I imagine most fights starting off, depending on how, like, it's going to start off with ranged combat with skirmishing, and then it's eventually going to close into melee combat as one side approaches the other.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually more or less settles off a lot of the main issues that I have, because melee combat is where most of the perilous stunts actually come into play. So people are just going to be naturally inclined to use them, because what the fuck else am I going to do with my other 2 AP, right?
Right. Like defend?
Yeah. I mean, hopefully, yes. But hopefully, yes.
That's the thing, though, with most perilous, or several perilous stunts, like the choke and the takedown, if you're effectively doing those, they have to spend AP to get back up in the case of the takedown. Or in the case of the chokehold, they can only try and escape the chokehold at the start of their turn.
Also, they're accumulating physical peril, and the more physical peril they accumulate, the less effective they are.
Exactly.
So, that's all fine. And again, what else are you going to use that AP for? You use up 1 to attack, 1 to move. You've got 1 left. You're either going to store it for a defense, but if you're clever, you might not even need that. Because of, and this is one of my criticisms for Zweihander, is I actually don't like how GM focused the penalties and bonuses are. Because that actually puts a lot of onus on the GM to come up and be consistent with those. For combat specifically, for everything else, it's fine. But I would actually really, really like a list of modifiers for combat, personally.
Right. Like, I know, for example, called shots. Like, they just say, yeah, you impose a difficulty that you decide, depending on.
Yeah, which, fine. There's... What's the cap on? There's no cap on penalties, right? There's just a cap on bonuses that a player can get.
So penalties, so the penalty is a difficulty rate. It's part of the difficulty rating, which it goes from 0 to -10 to -20 to -30.
So it caps out at -30.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you wanted to shoot someone in the head with a blunderbuss, for example, that'd be a neat trick. That's a -30 right there, right? However, you want to do a trick shot rebounding an arrow off of a metal plate into somebody's butt. Depending on the context, that could be anywhere from a -20 or a -30. And if you want to do it again, I got to remember what my decision was last time.
Yeah.
As opposed to a much more standard, okay, head X, weapon minus Y, so on and so forth. Even though there's a disarm for that, but like you get the idea.
Yeah. So like,
attacking someone engaged in melee with ranged weapons. That's another classic one. Attacking someone who's chokeholding someone else with ranged weapons specifically, because then you get into the human shield conundrum.
yeah.
And any game that has rules for human shields is automatically my favorite game at the time, because you never know when that's going to be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which I mean, all that makes like it makes sense. That it like I mean I understand why they put it on the GM side of things for that, but
saves words.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be nice to have. It's not crippling. The core is like, if you're the GM, just write it down.
Yeah.
Come up with your own list of whatever makes sense. But like, it's nice to have official statements on stuff.
Yeah. Which is like one of the complaints a lot of people have with other game systems. Like, just homebrew it, sure, but like, why should we homebrew it? You put these rules in here already.
Yeah. The theory with the so homebrew, actually no, this isn't well, that sounds like a topic for another day. I'm going to be totally honest here.
Yeah, no, I mean it totally is.
Back to encouraging dynamicism from your players. If the game heavily focuses on ranged combat, for example, as we stated, Zweihander is very much focused on melee, so it's not really a problem here. But as I mentioned, I played a lot of the Warhammer 40k RPGs, and as you can imagine, ranged weapons are pretty prevalent there.
Yeah.
And some of the ranges can get like absolutely ridiculous, where you have a player character who can move like maybe 10 meters in a turn, and you've got a gun that can comfortably fire up to 250 meters away.
Right.
Why would I ever do melee combat? Melee combat in those games is absolutely ridiculous, by the way, but odds are good you're just going to get shot out of existence before you ever get to it.
I think, if I remember correctly, that was my experience with the Flames of Freedom Quick Start, is that there was a much heavier emphasis on ranged combat opposed to the Zweihander melee combat.
Makes sense for the era. Not really a problem, but your approach to encouraging creative thinking for your players changes significantly.
Yeah.
Though it does have a very easy solution, which is lots of cover.
Yeah, exactly.
Lots.
Which brings us to our one point that we have been sort of jumping around here. We haven't really talked about cover a whole lot.
Yeah, cover's an interesting one, because in theory, it's really easy. You put something between you and the enemy. What more do you need?
Right, like...
In actuality, not that easy.
I think different systems handle cover differently. Like Cyberpunk 2020, for example, cover is just another form of armor, effectively. So it adds to your armor value.
That is my personal preferred way of doing it, honestly.
Yeah, because like for that makes it easier to handle, in my opinion. That is one, in my opinion, that's one of the stronger points of Cyberpunk 2020. But like other games, the cover gives you +2, +4, +1.
Untouchable.
Yeah, it increases your AC. But it makes it, I don't know. It's not like, because like then you have to worry about like what kind of cover is it? Is it soft cover? Is it hard cover?
Or it does both, which is infuriating.
Yeah. Like how do you deal with this cover? Like how do you deal with it when the players are entrenched in it? You know.
Yeah.
Because
so
go ahead.
Go. Nope. You're the host.
No, so you're the guest.
Yeah.
So your thoughts, go ahead. I talk a lot already in Discord.
Yeah, that's fair. So do I. The problem is getting me to stop talking, which is why I play on the careful side of that.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to cover, my preferred method of doing it is make it add to whatever damage resistance exists in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Because my thought process is you're rolling to hit, and with a ranged weapon, that means putting the projectile where the target is.
Mm-hmm.
There just happens to be something in the way, right?
Right.
So it doing less damage just makes sense to me. The problem with that arises when you start thinking, as you brought up, what kind of cover is it? Because then you need tables.
Yeah.
And the more often that I have to go refer to another section of the book for tables, the less happy I am. I remember in the 40k RPGs, I had to flip to 3 different spots because Fantasy Flight cannot arrange a rule book to save their lives in order to do cover, because cover increased the odds of you making a successful dodge roll
Mm-hmm.
and added to your armor.
Wow.
Depending on what kind of material was being used for cover, which was not. I was not pleased with that.
I would not be pleased with that either. Like,
fortunately, the dodge chance was just a static plus 10 for half cover, plus 20 for full cover, which is like, all right, that's easy enough to remember. But the table was like 4 or 5 entries. And it was like wood was like a +1 armor. By the way, power armor, like Space Marine power armor, gave you an 8 armor, so it was basically full plate and Zweihander.
Right.
So wood would give you 1, concrete would give you 2. Like it was pretty arbitrary and weird, but it worked. It would save your life from everything but guns that mattered. Because it turns out when an anti-tank rifle that basically just is a miniature nuke gets fired at you, it does not care about your cover. Who knew?
Who knew? Yeah.
Yeah, shocking. But when it simply detracts from the chance to hit, that feels really weak to me, because then it changes from it being a more tactical choice to it being a pure RNGesus choice.
Right.
Because like I actually would think that cover would make sense if it actually made it harder to avoid getting, like, specifically to dodge getting shot. Because if you're smart, you can't see the person shooting you.
Yeah, exactly.
Not very good cover if you can see them, because that means they can see you usually. And like usually you're pressed into like a corner or something, so like actually avoiding bullets significantly more difficult. That's why you have cover. Oh man, I'm having XCOM flashbacks right now, actually.
Oh no. Yeah, so like with cover, like how do you handle, like, how do you handle the, like, not quite negating, it's not quite the term I'm looking for, but like for cover itself, it can't take like 1,000,000 bullets before it gets destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah, that's frustrating. That was the other reason why in the Fantasy Flight games I had to refer to 3 different sections, because the rules for cover being destroyed were in another section.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, Fantasy Flight, I love you guys if you happen to be listening to this for whatever reason, but like, guys, formatting rulebooks, please, for the love of God, learn how to do it.
So, like, if the system itself doesn't have the rules, do you have any like rule of thumbs that you use?
I base it off of what the attack is. If it's an arrow and you're using like a stone column, I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Right.
An arrow might chip a stone column. It's not going to do much else beyond that. And if it chips a stone column, wow, that's impressive, actually. Same with most like primitive firearms. If we're playing in a more modern game and it's like a fucking missile launcher, then honestly, again, depending on, it's all context based at the end of the day, honestly. Which is, again, more of a burden on the GM, but most of it is pretty intuitive. And as long as you invoke rule 1 and or just claim rule of cool, your players probably won't argue with you. because example, that stone column, and you hit it with a rocket launcher, it's a pretty safe assumption that that stone column is now bye-bye.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it's no longer
Right?
standing.
Doesn't really matter what the actual science behind it may or may not be. Most people are just going to go, no, that makes sense. That's cool.
Yeah, that's the Hollywood thing.
I'm using a car for cover. In reality, cars do not explode when you shoot them. In game world, you're a dick for hiding behind that car, and it will explode on you if you're unlucky.
Yeah, that's let's see, I think Shadow Warrior, I think is the game that I'm referring to. I think it's called it's Shadow Warrior. And this is a video game.
I am familiar with it.
There's one section where there's just a whole street full of cars parked because it's the apocalypse just happened and people are just it happened while they were doing things.
Yep, it is that standard LA traffic scene.
Yeah, and so you have to go through these cars, and if you shoot one car, it's gonna blow up, and if it blows up, it's gonna blow the car next to it, and it's just gonna be a chain reaction.
Looking at you, XCOM.
But so so we've talked about ways to make these combat more interesting. I think now is a good time. It's the hour mark. Now is a good time, I think, to start actually applying these into writing a scene. So for those of you who are just now joining us, the Grim Litany of Librarians, we're writing a adventure each week. Each episode, we're writing scenes to an adventure that the plan is to release it on the Grand Perilous Library for free. When it's done, so. At the end of each episode, what we do is we spend about 30 minutes to an hour coming up with things to add to this adventure. So far we've already added that it's we're in a port town named Port Blood. And there is...
Sorry, I did not know the town's name.
Yeah, it's Port Blood.
Grade A naming. I am not throwing stones. I actually love it. That's fantastic. It gives you all you need to know. It's in a port. So there's sea, and there will be blood. Good movie.
Yeah.
Continue.
Port Blood, and it revolves around the political espionage of the importing of blood schnapps, a alcoholic beverage, which is kind of illegal in the city. We haven't really discussed why it's illegal. The idea was maybe it's illegal because the
oh no. Okay.
It's dangerous, but we haven't really settled down on it. Other than it's illegal and it's made from death hedges, which are these rose bushes that have been turned into vampiric rose bushes, and that we know that the major players are the Guild, the Stevedores Union, the Guild being the Merchants Guild, the Stevedores Union, and the Mayor. Those are the three main political factions that we have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And we already know that the players get drawn into a conflict between two members of the Stevedores Union in the introduction. They're drawn into a conflict where they're asked to basically side with one who wants to commit direct action and get the because they know the shipping guild is involved in bringing in this blood schnapps, but and so what they want to do is they want to do direct action and burn the warehouses down. The other one wants to work within the political system. And basically, the players are in this tavern when this discussion is happening, and they side with one or the other, and the other one leaves, and then they get the plot hook, which is, hey, we need to get this beverage out of our community. Can you help us with that? And so that's basically where Sean and I left off, and we figured that the next scene would probably be a combat scene of some type. So do you have any ideas for what that combat scene might entail?
I do have one minor recommendation as to why blood schnapps might not be allowed in the town. It can just be as simple as it's heavily tariffed.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the core of smuggling,
right?
And just cheap booze. Al Capone got started off cheap booze. Like that's all you really need for that kind of illegal substances.
Right.
Just as a side note. Um, hmm. So the thing that immediately comes to mind is the players just had to side with a faction,
Right.
and the representative of the spurned faction leaves, probably is upset. So my initial thought is he comes back with, I'm assuming he comes back with bruisers
Right. So,
and proceeds to go for the kneecaps.
I don't think that necessarily quite fits. Like, we do want the one who leaves because there are two. The two people are there's Morgan, who is a non-binary halfling, and
Okay.
Isaac, who is a male Atzlan lizard folk. So either one of those.
Wow, diverse town.
Yeah,
Holy crap.
like that's the whole point of Port Blood. Like the Atzlan are a majority there, but the intention like from the outset was to have every player ancestry represented in Port Blood.
Okay. Interesting.
So the Atzlan wants to direct action. The other one wants to work within the political sphere. So it feels like I mean I could easily see Isaac coming back with bruisers, but I don't feel like that. Like, 'cause they're not. So the two people who are arguing, Isaac and Morgan, they both have the same goal. They just disagree on how to get to the goal.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't necessarily see them coming back to physically assault the party at this junction as making sense. But it could be something like it could be.
So I'm sorry, really quick. They're trying to get the bloodstops out of the city.
Yeah, so
like as in like prohibition, get it out of the city, or they're trying to smuggle it out of the city.
They're trying to prohibition, because like.
Okay, I went immediately for the organized crime angle, which is absolutely where the knee breakers would come in.
Yeah. Which is what I was going to go into.
Oh,
like the shipping guild itself could possibly be involved.
Well, does the shipping guild know who these people are?
I would imagine that they probably do, yes. Because like they're
especially since one of them wants to work within the political machinations of the city.
Yeah.
Well, the guild sends knee breakers.
Okay, yeah. So
because what that does from a story perspective pretty much immediately is, okay, the players have done the Far Cry 5 thing or 4 thing where they pick how they're going to commit their atrocities. And then the other one leaves, spurned, whatever. And then the actual bad guy goes, the actual like bad guy's antagonistic force does something hostile to the players, which immediately entrenches the players' animosity towards these particular soon-to-be unfortunates, because let's be honest, the roaring rampage of revenge is about to start.
Yeah.
It gives players a solid reason to be like, all right, fuck these guys. They tried to hurt us. We're going to show them the Chicago way. Thank you, Sean Connery. Show them the Chicago way. And we're just going to burn them all to the ground, because that's how all players react, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's not just me. Please tell me it's not just my players, because
I know that the quickest way to get your players to dislike an enemy is to have that enemy directly involve themselves in their plans.
And take their stuff.
And take their stuff. Like, and
take their stuff.
Curse of Strahd, for example, like Strahd, Strahd does summon the players to the into Barovia, but like he doesn't like really care about them until a certain point, which is usually where they try to like where they escort Irina to the next town over, and at which point like Strahd starts paying a little bit of attention to them. If Strahd pops in himself before that to like menace the party, then the players are going to automatically care that Strahd isn't a force to be reckoned with, and they need to. And it just draws them even further in.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I can get behind the shipping guild sending thugs.
Like they knew this meeting. Like the shipping guild probably has people all over the place because they're probably the wealth. Like they're probably really rich, so they've probably got people talking. They knew this meeting was taking place, and they want to send a message.
Yeah.
So they send thugs in order to send the message. Doesn't have to be lethal.
Right, and this actually ties very well into something that Sean had suggested, which was to have a character eavesdropping. We this character exists and is eavesdropping magically, but we didn't really like define what this character's motivations were. So maybe this eavesdropping character is sending the signal to the shipping guild.
Yeah, I also wouldn't recommend doing it magically. Because unless there's a magically inclined character in the party, which with the way Zweihander character generation goes, is very unlikely.
Right.
Because what it's 20, like it's actually a really low chance of actually rolling
right.
a wizard.
The idea of it was that it's a thing that you can find out if you have access to the witch sight ability, like the witch sight spell. So you would see
which requires
which
requires you either to be or a tier 3 witch hunter. Yeah, which is not this doesn't sound like that adventure. That doesn't sound like this adventure. So
I think we had intended to make this an advanced one. Yeah. Ooh, 1 second.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
1 second. I have to do some moderation stuff.
Oh, good luck.
That's not. I have to remember how to get into the mod screen. Oh, there it is. So as I was saying, the adventure itself is I think we had intended for it to be a higher tier.
Okay, fair enough.
Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Cool. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do things on this view. Nice.
Is chat being exciting? I hope there's a chat that's being exciting.
No, it's not the chat being exciting. It's somebody posted some spam links.
Boring. Come on, get more creative.
It looks like somebody might have already taken care of it. No, they haven't. Okay. Yeah. So going on. So the idea of it was it was specifically for the it was for the characters to have the ability to if the characters have the ability to have a witch sight going on, they can see that this is additional information that they can learn if they have this ability, and it's not necessarily necessary for them to have it. So not necessarily necessary to have it, so they can do the so anyways, so this NPC could be eavesdropping to let people know to let the other people know that, hey, this it's time for us to jump in now.
Sure. One of the reasons that I would actually recommend it not being like a remote observation is so that the players actually have a greater chance of learning of it. And if their ability to, like, if they understand the situation in town well enough, and they're pretty good at deductive reasoning, they can go, oh shit, okay, something's about to go down, and they can actually prepare for it. So the fight that's going to inevitably happen in this leg breaker scenario is going to be very different if it's just the party sitting down having a beer and then people come and go for the knees, as opposed to the party's waiting for them because they saw someone stand up and leave and look awkward, right?
Right. So the idea itself was just they were in the tavern eavesdropping, so it could be that the person does get up after the other person leaves. So we can merge both ideas. So this unidentified person, my pencil has somehow been misplaced. 1 second.
Yep.
So, actually, so the eavesdropper gets up and calls some people in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what? So we do want this to be a higher tier adventure.
Yeah.
So what? So that gives us some room to play with. What these enemies could be. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be petty thugs. It could be like it could be Atslin, for example. It could be some type of Atslin, maybe. I'm not sure. I don't have the bestiary open off the top of my head.
So, I tend to find that in storylines. This is the introductory combat in this storyline, right?
Yes.
So, when you're dealing with organizations, when they mobilize for combat, what they send actually can tell you a lot about who you're dealing with. So we're dealing with like an organized crime sort of like wealth is our main resource kind of group, right?
Right.
So petty thugs is actually a really solid option for two reasons. One, because in Zweihander, petty thugs are still dangerous, which is important. Two, it shows it's really easy to show them being motivated by coin, which is probably what this is going to be, as opposed to like religious fanaticism, for another random example.
Right.
It also can hint at the potential resources of the opponent as well. For example, say they have the dosh to throw in a petty mage to add into the combat, as opposed to just being nothing but just mooks. It's like these guys are wealthy enough that they like hire a wizard to help out. Also, because it's the introductory combat, I find that tends to be okay for you to be a little bit nicer than what you could be under normal circumstances, especially since in this context, I can see this being sent as a warning, not as it's not a kill team that's being sent out here. This is a like, hey, we're sending you a message.
Right.
It's the horse head in the bed, because I'm just making all of the organized crime film references.
Right. So, maybe what we could do then, so maybe instead of using the petty thug stat block, we could probably use the brigand stat block.
Yep, that would be reasonable.
Because, like,
especially if they are actually brigands.
Yeah, they're, because like when you look at the art for the brigand, they're wearing brigandine armor and they've got like a sword and a flintlock pistol. That's way more intimidating, I think. So I feel like that could be a good one to use.
It would also depend on if the Merchants Guild knows who the party is.
Right.
If they know who the party is and that the party's involved, they might send some heavier hitters. If they don't, and they just think like, okay, it's an Aslan and a politician, they could just send the petty thugs. And then it's like, oh shit, like, we underestimated who we're dealing with. We need to escalate this should it continue to be a problem.
Right, okay. So we'll see they send in some petty thugs. And maybe they are led by a brigand.
Yeah, no, that's a solid option. The wizard, like the petty wizard idea, is also viable, because magic just by itself is such a huge game changer.
Right.
Like the haste spell, just by itself, is just changes so much. Invoke Fury. God, I have never seen a more terrifying like level 1 spell in a game in my life.
Yeah.
That's literally just because of the exploding sixes rule. It's just like, oh! Especially considering that if there's a wizard who can cast Invoke Fury, they can paint the faces of literally every enemy in that encounter.
Yeah, and
before the fight.
That is a thing that I have done as a player.
Yeah, that's brutal. That's brutal. I do not recommend this in this situation.
Right. No, but like if like it's a perfect intimidation factor. If you have like a group of people together, you can have the wizard paint like a trademark symbol on their face and have that be part of the Invoke Fury.
Yep. That's a solid option because Invoke Fury doesn't have a duration, really.
Yeah, no, it's I believe it's until your next attack.
The first attack that lands, first time you roll damage, which is important, very important.
So my personal formula for the petty cult or for petty thugs is if they're the same level as the players, which petty thugs are not, they're actually weaker. What I typically do is I would do a number of players, or a number of enemies equal to the number of players plus 2, which I find gives a decent number. And in this case, it makes sense as well as like an intimidation tactic, because like the idea is to outnumber the Atzlin and the Halfling for the intimidation factor. So what I think, I think that we could probably apply this formula to that, make it a number of petty thugs equal to the players. Do you feel like, so one of the things that this does have the capability of making combat turn into slog, though, because it'll be like, if you have a 6-player party, then you have the 6 players have to take their turn, and then the 8 players have the 8 NPCs have to take their turn. So maybe we should do a number equal to the players plus, or just flat out equal to the players, because this is the introductionary combat.
Yeah. It depends on what. So it's the introductory combat. We've kind of agreed that this is the antagonists sending a message. So if we're presuming a 5-man party, that means using your original formula, that's 7 thugs. You could knock that down to 2 thugs and make those 2 thugs into a more powerful leader enemy, the Brigand, as we mentioned, which makes that a little bit easier.
Yeah.
The other thing is that what it looks like with Zweihander combat is that it's if the enemy's damage threshold isn't especially high, dropping fools isn't that difficult, and the easier you can drop fools, the less numbers actually matter, really, especially if area of effect abilities come into play.
Right, and with go ahead.
If we're talking about like a tier 2 adventure, and if there's any kind of magic user in the party, there's a solid chance they have access to cone or explosion templates, which means suddenly that 7-man group is now suddenly a 4-man group.
Right.
And then that becomes substantially less of an issue in terms of the slot. I tend to trust players to come up with strategies to end a combat as quickly as possible. So I tend to plan things from the villain's perspective, which would 100% be like, I'm going to send as many dudes as I think is necessary to solve this problem.
Right.
The other thing, too, is that if the dudes are not aiming to kill, then I have no issues making the combat as stacked in the enemy's favor as possible, because there are really no permanent player problem consequences to that. At most, they get their stuff taken, which, as we discussed earlier, is a great way to get your players motivated to burn something to the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this instance, because it would be to send a message and like, hey, don't work with these people or you're going to get the shit kicked out of you, then I actually find that the number of players plus 2 is pretty reasonable, especially if you want to throw in, you want to replace a couple of them with a boss man.
Okay.
Like an actual threat,
right.
who just isn't there to kill them.
Right. So the Brigand themselves, they are a basic high, and the idea is actually to make this an advanced tier adventure. So we could probably do then is maybe go with the Ogre Mercenary instead of the Brigand.
Yep, that would be reasonable. Or a Corrupted Templar. just to show again that just how much wealth that these guys control, that they can solicit into service even the fanatically faithful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, so like
or you just pretend they're a knight errant or something.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was gonna bring up. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Templar. Like, I mean, we use a Templar fanatic stat block, but that doesn't mean
it's a dude in heavy armor. Yeah, moving on.
Exactly, just a dude in heavy armor.
Yeah,
I think I like that one better because that speaks to their wealth.
Exactly. And it also shows their dedication that they're willing to invest this much in sending a message.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a message that they're sending. So we have the Petty Thugs led by Templar Fanatic stat block. Now, do we think that because they are technically new in town, do you think that there should be there should probably be consequences if they actually kill people, right?
One, always. Because if nothing else, the guild now knows, oh, these guys play for keeps.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We need to respond it's the Chicago way. You send one of ours to the hospital, we send one of yours to the morgue.
Yeah.
And reverse, right? Because it's going to lead to an immediate escalation from the antagonist's standpoint, especially considering this is essentially an organized crime story.
Mm-hmm.
So like the next thing that could be sent out is, okay, like we're not fucking about anymore. We're not sending some thugs. We're hiring a small mercenary company to put you in the ground.
Yeah.
For interfering. But because this is self-defense, I don't think that murder should result in a huge series of consequences. Besides with the direct antagonists. Actually, no, I take that back. Corrupt law enforcement is very much a thing.
Yeah, because that's the other thing. Like the mayor himself is also corrupt. He's been in the guild's pocket, but he's trying to get out of the guild's pocket and establish his own supply of blood schnapps within the city.
Oh, so he wants to go independent.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that would be actually if the party does end up dropping bodies, then that would actually be a solid piece of blackmail the mayor could have over them in order to encourage them to see his side of things and to work for him. Like, hey, you work for me, this isn't a problem. You don't, this is going to be a problem.
Right. And may lead to, because that's a good way to bring in the mayor as an antagonistic force as well, or as a potential antagonistic force, and may lead to the mayor having the party arrested. And needing to do him some political favors, quote unquote political favors, for their freedom. See, that's something that I also like to include, like in my own adventures, like in the Beast of Jelen's Mire. There is a consequence, like you can break into a character's home in the story at one point, and there's a consequence for doing that if you get caught, which is if you get caught and you fight the character, the character's immune because they're a golem, so they're immune to normal damage. So they'll just like let you wail on them for a bit, and then they'll put you in a headlock and choke you out.
All right.
And then round you up and turn you into the law enforcement, and the law enforcement's gonna go, okay, so, or the mayor of the city's gonna go, okay, so we're gonna let you go this time on the promise that you leave this person alone. But if you don't leave them alone and cause more issues, the contract that you were hired for has been forfeited. And you will be arrested again and kept in prison. So I like the idea of having those consequences in there for doing really illegal
player
things.
shit. For doing player shit, because that's just what players do. I love them dearly, but God, they're a pain.
All right. So yeah,
you can tell I GM a lot.
you can. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh man.
For this combat, do you think? So we know that we want them to the combat to not necessarily be lethal. So should we have like maybe the Templar fanatic, quote unquote, opens up with a like stop right there, or not stop right there, but like they open up with like a spiel, to say, look, we know that. So this isn't necessarily for the players itself. So this is more addressing Isaac or Morgan, whoever is there. We know that you want to get rid of to interfere with our problems. So butt out.
The boss knows what you're up to, and he sent us to kindly ask that you stop it. Because the players are outsiders in this instance. This isn't addressed to them.
Yeah.
I also feel it's very reasonable for the spokesperson of the beatdown to tell them to leave.
Right.
Be like, okay, like if you like get out, or like we're gonna fuck, because they're outsiders, right? So the thugs don't know who they're dealing with. They don't know how horrifically dangerous the party probably is at this point. They're just gonna go like, hey, you guys look tough, leave, or we're gonna have a problem.
Right.
Because I always feel when designing combat, that retreat should never be seen as a failure.
Yeah.
So if they're just like, you know what, discretion's the better part of valor, good luck with whatever your next project is, insert faction head name here, and they leave.
So like maybe so they could say turn to players and go, don't get involved in this business.
Yeah. Keep your nose out. Get out of here, etc., etc. All the things that are basically guaranteed to get a group of players to try and murder the shit out of these people.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if combat breaks out, maybe we can have them like maybe have the thugs and stuff. Maybe have them focus entirely on using perilous stunts or something to incur peril. To incapacitate people.
Or moderate injuries. Because I feel with inflicting injuries specifically is like the key component to sending a message in this instance. But they're not really there for the kill. So after like beating them up and bruising them a little bit, they're probably going to go for the takedown. Or if somebody gets knocked unconscious, they just leave them be. That sort of thing.
Yeah, so they'll either do some perilous stunts to incur peril.
Because like bare fists have the pummeling quality, and pummeling can't inflict damage beyond can't inflict wounds beyond a certain category.
Yeah, it's beyond moderate and serious, I think.
Yeah. And like, let's be honest, these guys don't really care about the party, so if one of them accidentally dies, whoop-de-fucking-do.
Yeah, because it sounds like they've got like the kind of like a carte blanche from being part of the organized crime. Maybe this Templar fanatic is actually a sheriff, or not sheriff, but a guard.
Yep, that could work.
There we go.
Actually, I wouldn't necessarily do that, because that would connect them a little too deeply to the mayor as the sole authority, and would make it look pretty much immediately like the mayor is like if he offers like, hey, you help me, they're probably going to assume that it's a trick.
Gotcha. Okay.
I would try and keep the mayor as much of an outside influence as possible with this particular context. But having the Templar as like a mercenary or other important figure unrelated to law enforcement is a fine idea.
Okay.
He's a knight errant who just won a local joust recently, so he's a local celebrity who just also happens to be in the pocket of the guild.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I feel like this is a good point for like we've got this combat. We need to address some dynamic. Like, how are the other patrons going to react to this? Like, do we think that the patrons will stay out of it?
Fuck no. They're gonna run. They're gonna get out there as soon as humanly possible. Like, if it's a traditional bar, like a regular bar where people just go and drink,
right?
Patrons are gonna leave. The minute things go bad, they're gonna leave. One, because this makes sense, and two, because it gives a lot less NPCs for the DM to worry about.
Yeah.
If it's a different kind of bar, like it's the criminal front bar, or it's like a cop bar, for random example, like that kind of thing, that would change that up significantly. If it were a bar where like the town guard gather, then they're going to get involved to try and keep the peace, right?
Right. So
if it's a bar where there's a lot of criminal activity that's used as a front, then the actual owners are probably going to get a little bit upset of all the fighting. But if it's a just regular eating, drinking establishment, then patrons are gonna beat feet and try and get out of that as much as possible.
Yeah, so I feel like it's I feel like it's that last one. It's patrons, regular patrons.
Yeah.
So
that's also just the easiest option.
Yeah. So they're gonna try and get out of combat. I suppose then, like we tables and stuff, they could be used as cover. We could probably just put a note about that in. Tables can be used as cover.
I think I've brought up 3 or 4 times now that a tavern is just a fantastic environment for a fight, because there's just so much going on.
And drinks can be used for the dirty trick, perilous stunt.
They can also substitute as a fire bottle if the player is creative enough.
Or bottle bombs, yeah, because that's actually
bottle bombs. That's what it's called. Yeah,
that's actually a thing that we did in the in between. Adam's character, Severin, I believe was his name, ripped some cloth to try and make a bottle bomb out of the vodka we had found, which worked. Like, eventually, it took him a couple tries to get there. But it worked, and we were able to throw it at the enemies.
Yep, it's a pretty terrifying weapon. I'm gonna be honest, because fire is horrifically lethal.
Yeah. All right. So yeah. So it feels like we've covered most of the bases, right? We've got the objective, which is hurt Morgan or Isaac, but not kill them. And try and scare the party away, since the party seems to be involving themselves in this situation. Yeah. And we kind of know that the players are probably not going to want to get out, or they're going to try and protect their new friend.
It really depends on the party as to whether they get involved or not. But if there's uncertainty, the promise of reward is usually a solid way to get the party involved.
Right.
Yeah, like, hey, defend me, and I'll make sure you get paid. Sorry, if I end up, like, if I get the shit kicked out of me here, you don't get paid, guys. It's like, oh, we should probably do something about this.
Right. So, yeah. So, like, we've got the environment covered. Like, it's a tavern. People are gonna leave, and they're gonna have to deal with the patrons leaving, and then they have to deal with, like, the tables and stuff like that. They can use the tables for cover, making it a bit of a dynamic environment.
Cover, difficult terrain, improvised weapons, unintentional hazards, because I guarantee you someone's going to try and set everything on fire in there.
Yep.
And what's going to end up happening is you can design an environment as much as you like. You can't lead a horse to water and make them drink.
Right.
So if the players just want to stab shit up, then, like, This is a fantastic way of allowing them to just pretty much do whatever they want in terms of combat without it really impacting the combat itself.
Yeah.
Because it won't like punish them if they don't use environmental hazards or stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of room for creativity, because honestly, when it comes to players being creative, I just like to set up a sandbox and just let them run wild.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think we can probably call this here with this scene. Thank you so much for coming on today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's no problem. Do you have anything you wanna plug? Like,
so besides Lowborn 4, which is coming out, in which I've written 2 of the... How many articles are in there?
Oh,
I know you've written like 25 of them, but
I think there's like, I think maybe there's the 3 or 4 that I did, and then I think the ones that the Chromatic Chimera folks like Anna, who was lurking in the stream, did. Let's see who else wrote articles. I don't know if Lilith wrote an article this time, but yeah, you did write a couple, yeah.
Yeah, I wrote 2 articles. I wrote 2 articles for it. One is an expanded list of spells for the sorcery, necromancy, and one other arcana that I can't remember. Transmutation, my personal favorite. So of course I forgot its name. As well as I wrote an article called From the Workshop, which covers a variety of interesting new inventions for those of you who want to play a natural philosopher, but are a little overwhelmed by the creative potential that class has built into it. Specifically, if you like Bloodborne, I may or may not have designed trick weapons. I'm also writing more articles for Lowborn 5, because I find that my project completion skills seem to work better on like an article scale as opposed to like a whole adventure scale, because I actually finish these. So that's all I've really got to plug. I don't really do much of this stuff beyond just being a hobby. Yeah. Maybe more in the future, but who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
I got a life to live, unfortunately, and as fun as this would be,
Yeah, and of course, I'm Irene. You can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/DMIreneDB, where I sometimes stream. I haven't done a whole lot of that lately, but I do intend to get back to it eventually. As well as on Twitter at DMIreneDB. And you can find my stuff for Lowborn 3 and Lowborn 4, which is coming out tomorrow, on the Grim and Powerless Library. Yeah, and that's about all I have to plug. This Friday, take that back. This Friday, I'm gonna be over on the Defenders of Kobold with them playing Mutant Year Zero again. So tune in for that.
Exciting.
It's very exciting. It's a very fun system. With that,
never heard of it.
It's really fun. Like, we can talk about it like later.
Sure.
We'll like off topic or whatever. Yeah. Thank you all for showing up today, and once again, thank you again, Roland.
Not a problem. Thank you again for having me. I'm quite flattered.
All right, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.